Manufacturing Matters is an MFG Radio Network production brought to you by GIE Media's Manufacturing Group as industry experts take deep dives into the latest manufacturing matters, whether it's new innovations, products, technologies, and emerging markets that help you understand better why manufacturing matters to you and also to the top companies in the medical, aerospace, defense, and electric vehicle manufacturing industries.
Hello, and welcome to How Businesses Can Become Proactive, Not Reactive, brought to you by Aerospace Manufacturing and Design Magazine and the M. Ryan Group. I'm Eric Brothers, editor for the magazine and the webinar moderator. Tariffs, supply chain slowdowns, shifting customer expectations. If you're reacting more than planning, you're not alone, but it's time to shift the narrative. What can force a business to become reactive? What can it do to regain control and be productive? Mike Ryan, managing partner of the M. Ryan Group, discusses supply chain and customer pressures, putting businesses on the defensive, and offers proven solutions to put businesses back in charge of their processes. Mike Ryan is known for his ability to quickly break down complex supply chain problems and identify actions to generate cash, improve earnings before income taxes, depreciation, and amortization, EBITDA, and create repeatable and consistent results. He's a seasoned supply chain operations executive with 25 plus years of industry experience delivering results for manufacturing and distribution businesses. Mike's experience includes roles where he's driven organizational change, working closely with portfolio company leadership. Prior to founding his consulting firm in 2016, Michael held global supply chain and operations leadership roles that have been based on collaboration between sales, finance, supply chain, and manufacturing, with the likes of General Electric and the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. Before we begin, we'd like to thank Renishaw Industrial Metrology. From the core of their business to the heart of your manufacturing, their precision manufacturing solutions are helping manufacturers around the world tackle new production challenges. These include the increased demand for innovative new products with more complex parts, higher design specifications, and shorter product life cycles. For over 50 years, industrial metrology has been at the core of Renishaw's business. As precision manufacturers, they've developed robust process control solutions that give customers confidence their parts will meet design intent and their manufacturing processes perform as required. Process control solutions increase the levels of automation possible in manufacturing, reducing dependency on skilled operators to maintain the quality of production parts. The ability to create parts with tight tolerance features is vital in many industries for the performance, aesthetics, and safety of finished products. Renishaw's industrial metrology systems and sensors capture the data required to identify and control sources of variation, enabling increased throughput with reduced rework, concessions, and scrap. Learn how Renishaw is making a real difference to the capabilities of its customers across a broad range of industries. You can find the list at the website. To read more about Renishaw technologies and their real-world applications, download the latest issue of Renishaw's Innovation Matters magazine. Welcome, Mike Ryan.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate the opportunity to share some information with the audience. It is a very timely topic, understanding how a business can become less reactive and more proactive. And what we'll be talking through today is what reactive look like, what proactive can look like, and some steps we can take to get there. All right, so the title of the webinar is How Businesses Can Become Proactive, Not Reactive, and Shift from Chaos to Control Before It's Too Late. Next slide. So, in order to make this relatable, one thing I found is sharing a real life example of some of the chaos that can be created when a business is reactive instead of proactive. So in this case, had a manufacturing business, they had a key client. Key client approached the salesperson and said, hey, we've got an opportunity to see some demand from a competitor. Can you support a 25% increase in our orders on you in the next 30 days? Right. So if you're a salesperson and 25% extra incremental is about to land in your lap, the knee-jerk reaction was yes, right? So the salesperson said yes. They were under the impression or had the belief that procurement has worked absolute miracles in the past. They were confident that they could absolutely figure this out. So a couple things here. One of the gaps or the misses, right, in hindsight, is that sales didn't ask the customer if they actually needed everything in 30 days. It was, yes, thank you for the order. We're going to get right on it. So when the salesperson brought this order back to the business, it became chaos, to be polite. Procurement was not able to get a 25% increase in products through their regular channels. The only way to do it was to get it from another supplier. A supplier happened to be in Europe. To get the product over here to meet the customer demand, they couldn't put it on a boat, right? No matter how fast the boat was, it wasn't going to get here. So they had to air freight this product in. Punchline is the product still arrived late. So delivery dates were missed. The customers were unhappy. And those additional air freight costs eroded any incremental margin that the business would have gained. So while sales was trying to seize the opportunity and procurement was trying to bend over backwards to meet the orders, it just wasn't happening. So the moral of the story here is prior preparation could have prevented this. All right, so that's kind of the lead up. That this is a real world, lived it kind of example where wanting to please the customer, not wanting to leave any money on the table, but not fully considering the impact of saying yes, literally and figuratively caused more problems than it was worth. Next slide, please. So some of the reasons why reactive decisions are so expensive is because they're made in isolation. Ultimately, it's my belief that the person is trying to do the right thing, right? They have an opportunity. They want to do everything they can to meet that opportunity. And a lot of people don't like saying no. So when these reactive decisions are made, what happens is it creates a ripple effect. So, some examples of reactive decisions are last minute expediting, right? That's that's kind of what we just talked about. So last minute expediting, very expensive. Unplanned outsourcing when internal capacity falls short. So this is when, let's say, a factory is operating at 75, 80, 85% capacity, and demand comes in that they're not able to fulfill in the time that's required from the customer. So all of a sudden, instead of trying to make it in-house, the decision is made, let's buy it or have it made out of house. Right? That typically, especially when it's not planful, can be a very, very expensive decision. Likewise, when there are emergency production changes, so one product is running steady Eddie, get a frantic call from the customer, hey, I need you to make some of these right now, can you help me? And there's a shift in production, right? So all the setup, changeover, disruption in materials, that all costs money. Likewise with hiring temp labor during spikes in demand. So this is demand that the business did not see coming or didn't plan on materializing. So the only way they know how to react to a decision, react to a situation like this, is to hire temps and bring in temps, right? That costs money, not only in the training, but typically also in the quality as well. The next bullet, this is one of my favorite, the over ordering of materials due to fear of stockouts. All right, there's an old adage, and I'm emphasizing old. There's an old adage in the world of procurement is that You get fired when you run out of something. You're never going to get fired if you have too much of something. Uh, and that may have been true at one time, but now over ordering, or having product just in case, it ties up cash, it ties up space. I've seen businesses who have over ordered and ended up having to rent additional space to store that product, right? Which also is expensive. And then the flip side of that is when somebody has a mountain of inventory, they're running out of room, the cash is frozen, maybe they're paying 10 or 11% interest on their line of credit. The proverbial easy button for them is to let's slash prices to move that excess inventory. And while that is one way to turn inventory into cash, it is typically not the most profitable way to do it. So in all these cases, not having a plan, right? So failing to plan is planning to fail. Right? Reactive decisions tend to be expensive. Trying to buy flowers the morning of Valentine's Day is typically more expensive than buying them a day or two before. Right. So next slide, please. So what proactive looks like. Really, when I talk about being proactive, another way to say it is being planful, right? It's looking to the future. It's understanding what I call the mid-case scenario is, the best case or high case, and the low case or worst case scenario. And what this does is allow people to talk about and prepare for things before it happens, right? A very, I'll say, pertinent and real world example right now are tariffs. There's a lot of people, a lot of businesses that got caught unready for big increases in tariffs. Eric and I were speaking, before the webinar, in that I had a client, 2021. They saw what COVID did not only to the supply chains, but all the risk it created from being sourced, literally half a world away. So this client very, very proactively began to move all their production out of China, over the last 4 years. And ultimately what that resulted in is, as their competitors are implementing 30, 35, 40% price increases to compensate for the tariffs, 90+% of their production has been moved out of China. They only had to pass on a 5% price increase to their customers. So as a result of being proactive, they picked up a huge opportunity to take business from their competitors, because their competitors, quite frankly, were not prepared. So tariffs, in my mind, is a very, very pressing and current example where having plans in place, even if they've just been discussed and talked through, to say, here's how we're going to respond when and if tariffs are levied and at what rate, would put businesses in a much better position. So when we give examples of forward-looking decisions, right, we are bringing functional leaders together during major shifts. And this could be a swing up in demand, a swing down in demand. It could be large foundational shifts in their market or in their niche. And by talking through this ahead of time, it at least creates an outline of ways that they can respond and mitigate that risk, as compared to trying to make a decision into the moment. From a planning perspective, right, I do a lot of work with businesses really focused on demand and supply planning. From a planning perspective, by being able to see around the corner, right? So that's, hey, this is what I'm hearing from the market. This is what I'm hearing from my customers. Here's what I think is going to happen, and developing plans to be able to meet those changes ahead of time, right, allows the businesses more time to plan and respond. Likewise, by planning capacity for high and low scenarios, it gives an idea of, hey, this is the changes in material or manpower or machines that we need to take, right? If we see a 50% increase in the requirements of what we need to make, right? Here's how we can handle it, short term, medium term, long term. And ultimately, when we look at the value of being proactive, it's because proactive supply chains help drive profitable growth, right? It's because we're planful and we're talking through different scenarios and coming up with contingencies. So if and when one of those scenarios come to play, the business has already taken steps to think through how to respond. Right. So, the title is Proactive is Profitable. Another way to say it is Planful is Profitable. Next slide, please. Okay. So you're at a place where maybe the business historically has been reactive. You see what it's cost the business, and you're making a very active decision or conscious decision to shift from reactive to proactive. I tend to break things down into three groups: people, process, and technology. So as we look at these three groups and start to think about in what ways we can shift from reactive to proactive, when it comes to people, right, that is the most important part of this, these three legs. When it comes to people, creating that cross-functional collaboration and alignment, that's huge. And it may sound simple, or it may sound pedantic, but simply knowing who to call or knowing the people that you need to get together and assemble when a big change or disruption takes place, and having those relationships in place is invaluable. Having that understanding that, yes, while a business is made up of different functional groups, whether it's supply chain, manufacturing, finance, sales, marketing, right? They're all working towards the same goal, right? That's to help the business be as profitable and successful as it can be and keep its customers happy. So when we talk about being proactive, it's getting the people together ahead of time and having some level of conversation in place. So when something goes sideways, right, whether that's positive or negative, everybody knows who to talk with. From a process perspective, sales and operations planning is one process that can help a business become more planful and more proactive. But ultimately, as long as a process is definable, as in you can literally draw a picture of it, predictable, you can tell me what's going to happen next, repeatable, the same thing happens every single time, and trainable, meaning as people grow in the organization or people exit and new people come in, having a process that you can train people on takes a lot of friction out of it. So for something to truly be a process, it needs to be definable, predictable, repeatable, and trainable. And then the third leg of the stool is technology. And to me, technology is a tool. Excel is a tool, SAP is a tool, JD Edwards is a tool, NetSuite is a tool. They're all tools. And understanding, what tools you have and in what ways they can help you create different scenarios, create, hey, here's the cost of additional staffing, or here's the cost of reducing staffing or bringing extra materials in or pushing POs out, having a tool that you can create a model in, independent of whether it's Excel or it's SAP, having a tool to model these different scenarios is a great way to shift from being reactive to proactive. So, I typically anticipate, hey, what if demand goes up by 10%, or what if demand falls by 10%? What is that going to mean to the top line? What is that going to mean to the bottom line? Working through some of these scenarios in advance helps a business become that much more profitable because it's more planned. So having the right people aligned at the right time, to me, like that's the foundation. That's the base layer that you need to put in place to shift from reactive to proactive. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is another real world example. In this case, it's a $350 million manufacturer and distributor. They had a very, very complex portfolio. So while most businesses have or take a kind of a good, better, best approach, their approach was good, gooder, gooderest, better, better, betterest, best, bestest, super best, right? They had tons of duplication. And what came to pass was while their inventory was growing, they were actually losing sales. So they had, to put it plainly, they had too much of the wrong product and not enough of the right product. So where we began was with an inventory assessment, right? We knew something was wrong. The CFO saw a giant bubble on the balance sheet, and they didn't really quite understand how it got there. And more importantly, they didn't know what to do to get that pile to shrink. Right. So in the spirit of let's start with why, let's understand what the root cause is. Digging into the inventory, we quickly saw that more than 50% of the inventory had less than 2 turns. Right. So that is a lot of cash tied up that may move once every 6 months. And then in this case, what made it even more complex and more interesting is that there were big gaps between the forecast and the actual demand. So the forecast was a very, very optimistic forecast. They didn't have a process in place. There were no checks and balances to look at the forecast, compare it to the budget, and ask the question, okay, does this make sense? What are the reasons to believe that we think we're going to be able to capture, this much more demand and create this much more revenue? So that ultimately was one of the underlying drivers, that because the forecast was so optimistic, right, procurement responded by buying product to the forecast. And then, right, insult to injury was a lot of these products had very large minimum order quantities. So there were products where an MOQ of 1,000 could last the business 5 years. So what we did was a combination of 2 things. One is we implemented a process, number one, to go through and understand what the demand was and vet the demand. And then on the supply side, we went and did a comprehensive SKU rationalization to understand and truly quantify what the value each item brought to the business. So by number one, getting the forecast closer to reality, right, that tamped down some of the purchasing requirements. And then number two, by getting rid of those items that had low velocity and high minimum order quantities, we helped skinny up the portfolio. And ultimately, the end result was we freed up just over $2.3 million in the second half of 2023. So in this business, right, there was a big shift from being reactive, reacting to this very, very optimistic forecast and not questioning MOQs on the supply side, to becoming very, very proactive and planful, having the conversations. Sales would bring in a number. Hey, this channel, this customer, we see them going up by 18%. Okay, cool. So help me understand what the reasons to believe are, right? And by asking the reasons to believe, it's truly meant to be a constructive question, right? Help me understand why we're either going to make this product or buy this product. Help me understand, how real this demand is. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So I was thinking of ways to not be cliche, but ultimately it's the truth, right? The journey begins with a single step. And that step, most often, the businesses who I've seen make the shift or the pivot from being very, very reactive to very planful and proactive, was beginning with, what is the issue that plagues this business? It could be the business doesn't know how to forecast. It could be they've got an unreliable supplier base. It could be their product portfolio is too big. It could be the budget for the year is not grounded in reality. So by defining the problem you're trying to solve, that focuses in, right, that core group of people and the process and the technology at identifying in what ways, all right, we can try to solve that problem. So by starting with that one core challenge, right, it gives everybody right, a touchstone, right, a common place to start. And where we begin is, okay, let's start by understanding what the current state is with regards to people, process, and technology. And what I found going through this process, right, and it could be as simple or as complex as the business needs, but going through the process of understanding what the current state is for people, process, and technology is often really, 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 really eye-opening. I had a client, the problem that they were trying to solve was that their freight spend had increased 30% year over year. And from, for all intents and purposes, the business was flat, maybe up 3%. So there wasn't a huge increase in sales. And we got a group together to say, okay, let's capture the current state. Let's map this process, because we need to understand the why and the what behind freight rates just exploding. And, we got functional leaders into the room, people who actively, contributed to the process. So we had the manufacturing manager, we had the planner, we had the logistics coordinator, we had finance, and started mapping the process. And what we saw was that there were communication disconnects between some of the functions in terms of communicating, hey, this product is now ready, please schedule a shipment. And what we found was that 80% of the volume that got shipped out happened in the last week of the month. So we dug into that to figure out, okay, well, right, the business produces pretty consistently. Why is it all piling up? And what we found out was that the logistics coordinator had other responsibilities which weren't clear to the rest of the business, and they would save all that freight booking into the last week of the month and just bang it out in one fell swoop. So once we were able to communicate, hey, there's a big difference between booking a truck inside 48 hours versus booking a truck 2 weeks ahead of time. And they understood that cost, right? That person changed the process, and the freight spend came back down to levels that made a lot more sense, right? So that's kind of and it may be more of a tactical example of shifting from reactive to proactive, but it began with, a problem that kept happening month after month. It was an expensive problem for the business, and figuring out, okay, how do we get the right people together to talk about this and understand what's going on? And then the third step to becoming more proactive is to track and communicate the wins, right? This happened to be, with regards to the freight scheduling, this happened to be a significant win or reduction in cost for the business. And what we did was we held that up as an example of, hey, we saw this was costing the business a lot of money. We wanted to figure out constructively in what ways we can do things differently, and we figured it out. So we invited, whether it was, leaders inside the function or the people that work for the leaders, say, hey, what are some things that keep coming up month after month, quarter after quarter, year after year, that we can work together as a team, right? And by doing that, we created this flywheel effect and helped build momentum. Next slide, please. So, as we begin to, Mike Rowe likes to say, land the plane. As we begin to land the plane, some of the key takeaways are that you can regain control in your supply chain by aligning and bringing together people, process, and technology. My perspective is that chaos is optional, right? Often it's a decision that's passively made. You can make an active decision to become more proactive. Becoming proactive is a choice that you can make for your business. Second takeaway is don't wait for the next disruption to get serious about being proactive. So, if we bring it back home, bring it back to present day, and we think about, COVID 5 years ago and tariffs today, right? It's like the oak tree, right? The best time to plant an oak tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time to plant an oak tree is today. So whether it's tariffs or procurement or sourcing, instead of waiting for the next shoe to drop or the next disruption to hit, this is the time to go through and say, hey, what's my country of origin? What are tariff rates for other potential countries of origin? What would it be? What kind of investment would it be to bring something back, near shore or reshore back to the States? So, the best time to talk about tariffs would have been probably 2 years ago. The second best time is today. And that's in the spirit of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And the third takeaway is that proactive processes equal better decisions, better cash flow, and better outcomes. Right? Proactive beats reactive any day of the week and twice on Sunday. The more proactive a business can become, right, the more planful they can become, the more value they can unlock. And one of the things I want to make sure that I enunciate is that if a business is planful, it doesn't make them slow. It doesn't mean that they are slow to respond or slow to react. If anything, it's the opposite. The more planful, the more getting ahead of the curve, having conversation in advance a business is, it allows them to not only react and respond faster, it allows them to react and respond faster and make better decisions. So I just want to make sure that I brought that point home, that planful doesn't mean slow, right? Planful, thoughtful doesn't mean it takes 2 weeks for a decision to get made. On the contrary, right? If you've gamed out 3 different scenarios and understand how the business is going to respond to each of those three. When one of those three scenarios comes to pass, the business already knows what to do. So I just wanted to make sure that as we wrap this up, that I stated that explicitly, that planful, proactive, it does not mean slow. Next slide, please. All right. That is my inventory iceberg. That is cash frozen in a mountain of inventory. At this point, Eric, I think we're good to open it up to any questions that the audience. Thank you for joining us today. I appreciate it, and I'd love to take some questions.
All right. Thank you, Mike. A very insightful review of the process there. So what if you're a contract manufacturer and you've done the onshoring and you're ready for an influx and your salespeople won't say no and you get overwhelmed? Is there a way to like temper that and take it in manageable bites? Because the salespeople are going to say, we can't be leaving this money on the table. Let's just take all orders. And then you have the scenario that you talked about in your first slide.
That is a fantastic question. So the demand is real. Sales wants to satisfy. The business doesn't want to say no. In that case, I think the most important part to talk through and make sure sales and everybody in the business understands is that is setting expectations with the customers. So, if there's a customer who normally orders 1,000 a month and now they want 3,000, it's helping them understand, okay, well, when do you actually need the 3,000? Do you need them all in the next 30 days, or is that over 60 days, or is that over 90 days? So it's to me, it's an opportunity to open up a dialogue with the customer to understand, okay, when do you actually truly need this? And I'm going to be able to meet, half your demand in the next 30 days, and then the next 25% in the next 30 days. To me, it's all about setting expectations. To me, it's right, because I don't want to say no. I just want, so if I'm engaged with 3 clients and a fourth client comes in, I don't want to say no. I'll say, hey, right, the earliest that we can, begin the conversation is in 2 weeks, right? And in the meantime, right, this is the kind of information that we need to talk about. So, in a very long and windy way, Eric, I think the answer to the question is being mindful in setting expectations.
All right. So you talked a little bit about the just-in-time stock ordering process. How much of that is art and how much of that can be made a science?
It can be more science than art if a business has data on performance. How good of a supplier are they? If it's a supplier that delivers 95% on time, we can put just a very small buffer in place and use a just-in-time model. If there's a supplier who sometimes delivers in 2 weeks and the next time they deliver in 2 months, I'd say that number one, that supplier isn't a great candidate for just-in-time. And number two, now is really the great time to start identifying, other potential suppliers or alternative suppliers. So, just-in-time, right, it begins on data and performance, and it also is a great way to open up a conversation about, hey, do we need to find an alternative supplier, right? Because we've got these suppliers that are woefully inconsistent.
Okay, great opening for the requirement or the request for transparency. That becomes a big issue now. And as you say, if you're not getting that transparency from your suppliers, you're kind of operating in the dark. How do you open that conversation with your suppliers to judge whether you might need to find an alternate source for your...
I think I think helping the suppliers understand why you're asking for the information, to me, well, number one, it's the truth, right? Hey, we're trying to become more planful, right? If I'm the business and Eric, let's say you're the supplier, um, we want to be good customers of you. And one of the ways that we can do that is by being transparent about what we think we're going to order and when, right? It may not be a firm PO, but we want to communicate as best as we can. Hey, Eric, this is our needs for the next 6 months. So, right, you give a little, and then that's when you would expect the supplier to reciprocate. And if the supplier can't tell you what they plan to produce over the next 6 months, I think it's perfectly valid and truthful to say, hey, that doesn't give me a really warm and fuzzy, comfortable feeling. Because if I can't get some kind of reciprocation in kind in terms of some visibility, right? Then, right, this can create issues for us, moving forward. And it's not, hey, supplier, tell me all the other people you're selling to and all the quantities you're selling to. I don't, right? I'm not asking for that. What I'm trying to understand is the level of confidence that you have in being able to meet my needs.
Okay. Clearly, the time to do this planning is before the crisis arrives. Um, so when people are sitting down and trying to do that, I hear the term de-risking all the time. Everyone wants to de-risk any process.
Right.
There's a good place to start with that. I mean, if you have that luxury of saying, we know something bad may happen, how would we respond? An emergency response, so to speak. Is there a short list that you can offer?
The short list, the place where I would start first is, I call them lessons learned. What has burned us in the past? Where have we fell down, stubbed our toe in the past? And right, how is it? Those who don't understand history are doomed to repeat it. It's okay. What has caught us off guard in the past? How did we react? How can we respond differently in the future? And then I think kind of the ultimate part of the litmus test is understanding what's the probability of this happening again, right? So if it's the what was it, the Evergreen, went sideways in the Suez Canal, I wouldn't say the probability of that is zero. So it may be, hey, if there is a disruption or a choke point, how do we plan for it? I know at Goodyear, spent 8 years working with Goodyear, we had a risk management team that planned, seasonally for weather events, right? They knew that during a certain period of the year, they were not going to bring freight into the Gulf of Mexico, or they were not going to bring it into the West Coast. So looking to the past for things that have created issues, that's a great place to start.
Okay. Do you have any other examples of proactive decisions or examples where acting proactively or having that conversation prevented an issue from blowing up out of proportion?
Yeah, actually. So this is in the vein of a SKU rationalization. Working with a client, they had, and admittedly, self-admittedly, they had a very, very complex portfolio. And their perspective was, they had this one product line. There were 12 products in the line. 4 sold really well, like definitely A items, right? They moved. So 4 sold well. 3 or 4 were kind of in the B, C category. 2 were kind of D's, maybe they sold a little, and 2 were just absolute, like they couldn't sell them. So, I had proposed, okay, like these two products that just don't sell, let's kill these two products. And there was this huge concern from the sales team that if we don't offer these two products, the customers are not going to buy the other 10. And I'm like, okay, well, instead of just making the decision to kill these two products, let's go out there and let's talk to your key customers. Let's talk to your big distributors and let's ask them the question. Right, because this is a significant amount of change that it's not just a decision we want to launch on these big customers. We want to have the dialogue. We want to be proactive. So sat down with a customer that accounted for almost 30% of the business for this one product line and said, hey, we're trying to get an understanding of how important these two items are to this whole product line. And said, hey, these really don't sell. They're not very popular. It's taking up shelf space. How would you feel if we killed these two products? Their first and only question was, are there alternatives to these two products in other lines that you sell? And the answer is yes. They're like, okay. So just to be sure, you're saying it's okay to kill these two products and you will continue to buy these other 10 products. And they said, yes, absolutely. So that was a situation where, involving one of the key customers in that decision and being proactive, as opposed to saying, hey, no, we're not selling that anymore. Right. That actually built up goodwill with the customer.
All right. So you spoke about one of the things to being reactive or being proactive instead of reactive was people, process, and technology. With the talent shortage, where should somebody focus on shoring up, so to speak, their talent needs? Are there any particular job classifications or sections that would be better beyond, say, just the need for production?
That's a great question. Every business is unique. Each industry has its own challenges. What I'm seeing with my clients right now is businesses are looking, the roles they're looking to fill, right? They're not all supply chain. Sometimes they're finance, sometimes they're sales. I'd say the two core qualities that they're hiring for is somebody who's comfortable with data and somebody who's got good interpersonal skills, because they know, somebody who may be classically trained or experienced in finance, they could make a good supply chain candidate. Somebody who is a salesperson that's very data driven could make a good candidate for a supply chain role or for a finance role, right? Because they're comfortable with numbers and data and they're comfortable with people. So instead of saying, hey, I'm seeing a lot of these roles or that roles, what I'm starting to see is more the qualities or the attributes of the candidates evolve, right? Not just I need a person who can do A. It's, I would rather take somebody who has experience in 2 or 3 different functional areas, who's good with data and personable, and I can train them how to do a job.
Okay. Say, as a result of this conversation, there's a CEO. It says, yes, tomorrow we're going to have a meeting and we're going to start being proactive instead of reactive. How best can they get buy-in from everyone else saying, oh boy, here we go again. Here's another initiative we're not prepared or have the staff or the resources to handle. Is there a way to kind of take baby steps to get that momentum going? You talked about momentum and celebrating small successes. That kind of has to start, in my view, right from the very beginning. What advice do you have for that?
My advice there, Eric, is I call it the WIFM, WIIFM, what's in it for me. So if I'm the CEO and I'm looking around the table, what I'm thinking about is what the benefits are to each person that's sitting around the table with me. Finance, how am I going to make your life a little bit easier? Supply chain, how am I going to make your life a little bit easier? And that's really where I found the most buy-in is created, is where we can verbalize, yes, I acknowledge that, right, this is going to be new, or it's going to be a different process, it's going to be a little bit of work, and this is the benefit that you personally or your function or your staff is going to receive, right? So that's the helping people understand what's in it for them as we make a change to become more proactive. For me, that's the best place to start.
Okay. Can you amplify a little bit on the sales and operations role in that collaboration?
Yeah, so to me, it's a dynamic tension, right? It's a positive, constructive, dynamic tension where, I've worked in organizations where, the VP sales or the chief revenue officer says, I want to sell one more than you can make, right? And I'm saying, I want to make one more than you can sell, right? So we're challenging one another, um, to push and do better, increase that top line, increase the bottom line. And the more, I see it as the more collaborative sales and operations can be with one another, right? Then it helps, right? It creates that understanding of, it's not the sales guy or the sales gal, right? I don't want to let somebody down. And by having those conversations and being able to say, hey, I think I'm going to get this order and I want to give you the heads up, or, hey, I think this customer, they're struggling, they're going to cancel, or from ops, hey, I know, right, we're having some throughput challenges right now. I want to give you the heads up so you can proactively talk to your customers and let them know that, they may not get it on the due date. It may be a couple days late. So the more conversation and dialogue between sales and operations, typically the more productive and profitable business is.
All right. You spoke a little bit about technology. Are there any things to look for, like in enterprise resource planning software or things like that, that are maybe new that would be more helpful in this modern age where we have to consider tariffs and everything else? Do you have any first off?
I do, and it really depends on the needs of the business. It truly does, not only in the size but the complexity. Um, I found that like SAP, right? It's like $1 million piece of software. They'd be happy to sell it to a $1 million a year revenue business, but it's not what the business needs. So for me, looking at technology, it begins inside the business to say, here's what we need, right? Here are the gaps. Here are the gaps. It's a needs analysis. Here are the gaps that we're trying to close, and what piece of technology is the best fit, right? And not only for the problems or challenges of today, but where we see the business 3 or 5 years from now, right? Because the worst thing is to spend a ton of time, energy, and effort bringing a new piece of software in, only to outgrow the software 2 or 3 years down the road. So it's understanding the needs of the business today, drawing as best as you can what you think the future needs of the business as it scales, and finding a solution that works well for the business.
Okay. Mike, do you have an example of a company or a business that was just way going down the wrong track, and they had a miraculous turnaround to become proactive? Do you have an example, and what was it that was a key to turning the ship around, so to speak?
So yes, had a business where business was sold, new ownership bought the business. They looked at the balance sheet. They looked at how well the business was doing in satisfying customers, and they were quickly on their way to falling off a cliff, right? So they had their fill rates were dropping. Historically, they had been mid 90s fill rates. Their fill rates were in the low 70s. Inventory was growing. Their procurement spend was through the roof. And they really couldn't understand why. In this case, it all came down to planning. There was a forecast that literally and figuratively was a black box. The person building the forecast didn't talk to sales, didn't talk to finance. It was more like, here's the forecast, go build and buy to meet this forecast. So it really began at the start of, and I don't want to say process because they really didn't have a process, but it really began at the start with having a bad forecast. And then that bad forecast just rippled and compounded. So beginning with the end in mind, right? It's like, okay, well, why is the inventory growing? Why are customers unhappy? Why are fill rates dropping? Right. And it quickly pointed back to the origin being this black box that nobody knew how the forecast was made. So what we did was, we introduced a very rudimentary Excel tool that the planner and the sales team and finance all worked together in and all collaborated in and had conversations in. And in a matter of, it was about 4 months on the key items, because we started there first, their A items, they saw fill rates go from 70 to 90. And it's because the right people were talking about the right things at the right time.
Is there any difference in the advice you would offer a business that's in the B2B market, the business to business? Because a lot of times those are long range projections, and the need for parts for aerospace or medical devices is much longer than, say, a trendy business, a consumer product.
Oh, yeah, so absolutely. And most of my clients are B2B, and the ones that are B2C go through distribution channels. So they're kind of still B2B. The further you can look down the road, the better. And the way I describe it is, some businesses, they are literally looking down at their feet at the next 6 inches in front of their feet on the floor. They don't see a chair that's 3 feet in front of them because they're too busy looking at the here and now. So, in the analogy, I ask people to pick their head up and look further out. So, if a business right now is planning for today, tomorrow, and next week, okay, let's see if we can stretch that horizon out to next month or next quarter or the next 6 months. Because what they should see is, number one, a lot of the variation start to smooth out over time. And number two, it lets them be not only better customers, but it also helps them be better suppliers to their customers.
Manufacturing Matters is an MFG Radio Network production brought to you by GIE Media's Manufacturing Group, as industry experts take deep dives into the latest manufacturing matters, whether it's new innovations, products, technologies, and emerging markets that help you understand better why manufacturing matters to you and also to the top companies in the medical, aerospace, defense, and electric vehicle manufacturing industries.
So yes, the further out, the better, realizing that the next 30 or 60 days from a B2B customer may be firm, but if we look in aerospace, there are government contracts that go out 24 months. And those are that's, to me, it's like, that's the best planning scenario possible, where I have a contract that lasts 24 months and I know exactly what I need to make and exactly when to make it.
Yeah, that is sort of a luxury amidst all of the uncertainty out there. So,
Yeah.
well, Mike, we're just about out of time. I want to thank our attendees for their attention. And Mike, thank you for your insightful comments and answering all my questions that have come up. And I want to thank Renishaw Industrial Metrology. And we asked you to be sure to register for our upcoming free webinars by clicking on the hamburger menu tab of our websites. That's the 3 horizontal lines on the header bar at the upper left. And on the drop-down menu, click the events link, which is 5 entries from the top. If you have any comments or suggestions for webinars, please email them to me at ebrothers@gie.net. On behalf of Aerospace Manufacturing and Design, I wish you all a good day and goodbye for now.
Thank you.
You can listen to all of our episodes of Manufacturing Matters and Lunch and Learn podcast from the MFG Radio Network on Spotify, Apple Music, and on our websites, todaysmedicaldevelopments.com, aerospacemanufacturinganddesign.com, defenseandmunitions.com, and evdesignandmanufacturing.com.